Nora Sullivan clutched the letter to her chest as the stagecoach bounced along the dusty trail toward Silver Creek, Wyoming territory. The year was 1875, and at 22 years old, she was embarking on what she hoped would be the beginning of a new life, one far away from the orphanage in Boston where she had spent most of her years. The letter had come 3 months ago in response to her advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette. Mr. Harold Bingham, a successful merchant in Silver Creek, had written that he was seeking a bride with good family connections to help him establish himself in proper society. Nora had been truthful about most things in her reply: her age, her education at the orphanage, her skills as a seamstress, but she had been deliberately vague about her family situation, hoping that by the time she arrived, her other qualities would outweigh her lack of relations. "First time out west, miss?" The elderly woman sitting across from her smiled kindly, her weathered face creased with wrinkles that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. "Yes, madam," Nora replied, tucking a strand of her auburn hair back into her bonnet. "I'm to be married in Silver Creek. Mail order bride, are you?" The woman didn't seem judgmental, merely curious. Nora nodded, her fingers nervously smoothing the wrinkles from her gray traveling dress. It was her best outfit, though it had seen better days. "Mr. Bingham seems like a good man from his letters." The woman's expression softened. "I hope he is, dear. It takes courage to travel so far to marry a stranger." Courage, or desperation, Nora thought but didn't say. The orphanage had made it clear she could no longer stay once she turned 21. The past year of working as a seamstress in a crowded Boston factory had nearly broken her spirit. When she saw the advertisement for women willing to become brides in the West, it had seemed like divine providence. The stagecoach rolled into Silver Creek just as the afternoon sun was beginning to lower in the sky. Nora peered out the window, taking in her first glimpse of the town that would be her new home. A single dusty main street was lined with wooden buildings: a general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a bank, and various other establishments. It was smaller than she had imagined, but still larger than she had feared. As the coach came to a stop in front of the Silver Creek Hotel, Nora's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. Mr. Bingham had written that he would meet her here. She gathered her small carpet bag and the battered trunk that contained all her worldly possessions. The driver helped her down, and Nora stood uncertainly on the wooden sidewalk, scanning the small crowd that had gathered to meet the stage. A portly man in an expensive suit separated himself from the others and approached her, his eyes evaluating her appearance with a scrutiny that made her uncomfortable. "Miss Sullivan?" he inquired, his voice polished and educated. "Yes, sir." "Mr. Bingham?" Nora extended her gloved hand, trying to keep it from trembling. He took it briefly, his handshake perfunctory. "Indeed. Welcome to Silver Creek. I trust your journey was satisfactory." "Yes, thank you, although quite long." Mr. Bingham nodded, his expression unreadable. "We should speak privately. I've arranged for tea in the hotel dining room." Nora followed him inside, leaving her trunk to be delivered later. The hotel dining room was quiet at this hour, with only a few travelers seated at the tables. Mr. Bingham selected a corner table and pulled out a chair for her with stiff courtesy. Once tea had been ordered and served, Mr. Bingham leaned forward. "Miss Sullivan, in your letters, you were not forthcoming about your family situation. I had assumed you were from a respectable, if perhaps modest, background." Nora's heart sank. She set her teacup down carefully to hide the sudden tremor in her hands. "I apologize if I misled you, Mr. Bingham. I was raised in an orphanage from the age of 5 after my parents died of influenza. I have no family to speak of." Mr. Bingham's expression hardened. "I see. That is unfortunate. You must understand my position, Miss Sullivan. As a merchant seeking to establish connections with Eastern suppliers, I require a wife who can provide social introductions and family connections. Without such advantages, I'm afraid you would not be suitable." The words struck Nora like physical blows. But I will, of course, pay for your room here tonight and purchase your return ticket to Boston tomorrow, Mr. Bingham continued smoothly. I apologize for the inconvenience, but business considerations must take precedence. Nora sat in stunned silence, her dreams crumbling around her. Return to Boston? To what? She had given up her position at the factory, sold what few possessions she couldn't bring with her. There was nothing for her there. Mr. Bingham, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I understand your disappointment, but I've come all this way. Surely there must be some position in town, perhaps as a seamstress or shop girl, where I could prove my worth. He shook his head. Silver Creek is a small town, Miss Sullivan. Positions are few, and most businesses are family affairs. I doubt you would find suitable employment. He stood abruptly. I have an appointment to keep. The hotel staff will assist you with arrangements for tomorrow's stage. And with that, he was gone, leaving Nora alone with a cooling pot of tea and a future suddenly as empty as the cup before her. She remained at the table long after Mr. Bingham departed, unable to summon the energy to move. What was she to do now? Her meager savings would not last long, certainly not enough for a return ticket to Boston and establishing herself anew there. Miss, are you all right? A young waitress approached the table, concern in her eyes. Nora blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. Yes, thank you. I'm just contemplating my options. The waitress glanced toward the door where Mr. Bingham had exited. If you don't mind me saying, that man has been through 3 potential brides already. Never finds them suitable enough for his high and mighty connections. She lowered her voice. Folks say he just likes having young ladies come out at their own expense, so he can look them over without having to commit. Nora's cheeks burned with humiliation. I see. I'm sorry, miss. Didn't mean to upset you further. The waitress hesitated. If you're needing work, you might check with Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house. One of her girls just got married, and she mentioned needing help. Nora grasped at this small thread of hope. Thank you. I'll do that. The Peterson boarding house was a 2-story clapboard building at the edge of town. Nora approached it with trepidation, her carpet bag heavy in her hand. The sign on the front advertised clean rooms for respectable ladies in faded paint. Mrs. Peterson turned out to be a bustling woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled into a severe bun. She listened to Nora's situation with surprising sympathy. Another one of Bingham's discards, eh? That man has more pride than sense. She looked Nora up and down critically. You say you can sew? Yes, madam. I worked in a dressmaking factory in Boston, and before that, I learned at the orphanage. Mrs. Peterson nodded thoughtfully. I can offer you a small room and meals in exchange for helping with the cleaning and mending. If your work proves satisfactory, we might arrange a small wage as well. It wasn't what Nora had traveled west for, but it was better than returning to Boston in disgrace. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I accept. The room was indeed small, little more than a converted closet under the stairs, but it was clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a hook for her clothes. Nora unpacked her few belongings and changed into a simpler dress for work. The next weeks passed in a blur of scrubbing floors, changing linens, and mending endless piles of clothing. The work was hard, but Mrs. Peterson was fair, if stern, and the boarders, mostly young women working as teachers or shop girls, were friendly enough. Nora tried not to think about her shattered dreams. At least she had a roof over her head and food in her stomach. Still, as she watched several of the other boarders courting with local men, she couldn't help the pang of loneliness that stabbed at her heart. One rainy afternoon in late April, Mrs. Peterson asked Nora to deliver a package to the Broken Spur Ranch outside of town. Old Mrs. Monroe ordered some special tea for her rheumatism, she explained, handing Nora a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Her grandson usually picks up their orders, but he hasn't been in town this week. How far is the ranch? Nora asked, eyeing the steady drizzle outside. About 3 miles north. Take the wagon, Mr. Peterson won't need it today with this weather. She hesitated. Owen Monroe runs that ranch now. His parents died in a Sioux raid when he was just a boy. Good man, but keeps to himself mostly. Been raising his grandmother since she broke her hip last year. Nora hitched the old mare to the wagon as Mrs. Peterson had shown her and set off through the rain. The road north of town quickly became little more than a muddy trail, and she was grateful for the mare's sure-footedness. The countryside was beautiful despite the weather, rolling hills covered in spring grass, stands of cottonwood trees along a winding creek. The broken spur ranch came into view as she crested a small hill, a modest but well-maintained house, a large barn, and several outbuildings, all surrounded by split-rail fencing. As she approached, a dog began to bark, and a tall figure emerged from the barn. Nora pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and covered her head with her shawl against the rain. The man from the barn strode toward her, his long legs eating up the distance quickly. He wore a rain-slicked duster over work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. "Help you, madam?" His voice was deep, with a hint of a drawl. "I've brought a package from town for Mrs. Monroe," Nora explained, holding up the parcel. "Mrs. Peterson asked me to deliver it." He stepped closer, and Nora could see his face, now tanned and weathered, with strong features and the beginnings of a beard. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something striking about him. "I'm Owen Monroe," he said, taking the package. "You're new in town? Don't believe we've met." "Nora Sullivan. I work for Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house." Owen nodded. "Appreciate you bringing this out in the rain. Grandmother's been asking about her tea." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Storm's getting worse. You'd best come inside until it passes." Nora hesitated, but a crack of thunder decided for her. "Thank you." She followed Owen to the house, where he held the door for her with an old-fashioned courtesy that surprised her. The interior was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, solid wooden furniture worn smooth with age, and braided rugs on the plank floors. An elderly woman sat in a rocking chair near the fire, a quilt spread across her lap despite the mild spring weather. She looked up as they entered, her face lighting with curiosity. "We have a visitor, grandmother," Owen said, his voice gentling. "Miss Sullivan from town, bringing your tea." "Well, isn't that kind?" Mrs. Monroe smiled warmly. "Come closer, dear, let me see you. My eyes aren't what they used to be." Nora approached and found herself being studied by sharp eyes and a face as wrinkled as a dried apple. Whatever Mrs. Monroe saw seemed to satisfy her, for she nodded approvingly. "Sit down, child. Owen, fetch our guest some coffee, and some of those cookies I baked yesterday." "Really, that's not necessary," Nora began. "Nonsense. You came all this way in the rain. The least we can do is offer some hospitality." Mrs. Monroe patted the chair beside her. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Sullivan. You're not from around here, are you? I can hear the East in your voice." Before Nora realized it, she was telling Mrs. Monroe her story about the orphanage, her decision to come west as a mail-order bride, and Mr. Bingham's rejection. She hadn't meant to reveal so much, but there was something about the old woman's kind attention that drew the words from her. "That Bingham is a fool," Mrs. Monroe declared when Nora finished. "Turning away a respectable young woman just because she has no family. As if that's something you could help." Owen, who had returned with the coffee and been silently listening, spoke up. "Bingham cares more about connections than character. Always has." "And what would you know about character, grandson?" Mrs. Monroe asked with a twinkle in her eye. "You who barely speaks 2 words to folks in town?" A faint flush appeared on Owen's tanned cheeks. "I speak when I have something worth saying." Mrs. Monroe turned back to Nora. "Don't you pay him any mind, dear. Owen was raised proper, but he spent too much time with his horses and not enough with people. She leaned forward confidentially. Lost his sweetheart to typhoid 10 years back. Been keeping to himself ever since. Grandmother, Owen said, a warning in his tone. The old woman waved a dismissive hand. Girl ought to know why you're such a bear sometimes. She smiled at Nora.
He's a good man, though.
Takes care of an old woman who can't even make it up the stairs anymore. The storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the windows. Nora sipped her coffee, oddly comfortable in this stranger's home. Owen excused himself to check on the animals, leaving Nora alone with Mrs. Monroe. He built me a bedroom down here when I broke my hip, the old woman said, gesturing toward a door off the main room. Moved all my things himself. Said it was easier than carrying me up and down stairs, but I know he did it so I wouldn't feel trapped in one room. He seems very considerate, Nora said. He is. Mrs. Monroe's eyes grew distant. This place was his father's dream, my son James. Owen was just 16 when we lost James and his wife. He's been running things ever since, making sure the dream didn't die too. When Owen returned, soaked to the skin despite his duster, he brought news that the creek was rising dangerously. Don't think you should try to get back to town tonight, Miss Sullivan. That low road will be flooded by now. Oh. Nora stood up, alarmed. But I can't impose. Nonsense, Mrs. Monroe interrupted. We have a perfectly good spare room. Owen, go show Miss Sullivan where she can freshen up, then see to those wet clothes of yours before you catch your death. Owen led Nora upstairs to a small but neat bedroom. My sister's room, before she married and moved to Denver, he explained. There should be a nightgown in the chest that might fit you. I'll have some dinner ready in about an hour. Left alone, Nora explored the room curiously. It was clearly still kept ready for visits, with fresh linens on the bed and curtains at the windows. The chest yielded a cotton nightgown that would be a bit short but serviceable, and a wrapper she could wear over it for modesty. When she came downstairs, she found Owen had changed into dry clothes and was setting the table while something savory bubbled in a pot on the stove. Hope you don't mind a simple meal, he said. Not much of a cook, but I can manage a stew. It smells wonderful. And it did rich with the scent of beef and vegetables. Can I help with anything? Owen shook his head. Just keep grandmother company. She doesn't get many visitors out here. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Mrs. Monroe kept the conversation flowing with stories about the early days of Silver Creek and gentle teasing of her grandson, who took it with good-natured tolerance. Nora found herself laughing more than she had in months. After helping to clean up, Nora sat with Mrs. Monroe by the fire while Owen went out for a final check on the animals. The old woman's gnarled hands worked steadily at a piece of knitting. Tell me, child, what will you do now? She asked. Will you stay in Silver Creek? Nora sighed. I don't know. Mrs. Peterson has been kind, but the work is hard for very little pay. I had hoped. She trailed off, embarrassed. You hope to have a home of your own, Mrs. Monroe finished for her. Nothing wrong with that. It's what most women want. She set her knitting down. Have you considered advertising again? There are plenty of good men in these parts looking for wives. After what happened with Mr. Bingham, I'm not sure I could face it, Nora admitted. The humiliation. Humiliation is letting one man's foolishness dictate your future, Mrs. Monroe said firmly. You came west for a reason, child. Don't give up on that dream so easily. When Owen returned, Mrs. Monroe announced she was tired and ready for bed. Owen helped her to her room, returning a few minutes later to find Nora still by the fire, lost in thought. Grandmother giving you advice? He asked, a hint of amusement in his voice as he settled into the chair his grandmother had vacated. Nora smiled.
Yes.
She thinks I should try again to find a husband. Owen was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. Grandmother believes everyone should be married. Been trying to marry me off for years. Why haven't you? The question slipped out before Nora could stop it. I'm sorry, that's far too personal. No, it's a fair question. Owen's expression was thoughtful. After Marie died, my fiancé, I threw myself into making the ranch work. Then grandmother needed me. Just never seemed to be the right time. He looked at her directly. What about you? Before Bingham, I mean, no one in Boston. Nora shook her head.
No one.
The orphanage. It doesn't exactly prepare you for normal social interactions. By the time I was working at the factory, I was too exhausted most days to think about courting. She hesitated. And I suppose I always felt I had nothing to offer. No family connections, no dowry. Seems to me family connections are overrated, Owen said. A woman willing to work hard, to face the challenges of life out here, that's worth more than any dowry. They talked late into the night, the fire burning down to embers as Nora told him about growing up in the orphanage, and Owen shared stories about building the ranch after his parents died. There was an ease to their conversation that surprised Nora, as if they had known each other much longer than a few hours. When Nora finally went up to bed, she found herself thinking about Owen's words. Was there really a place for someone like her in the West? A place where what mattered was what you could do, not where you came from. The morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having moved on during the night. Owen drove Nora back to town in his wagon, the journey giving them more time to talk. As they approached Silver Creek, Nora felt a strange reluctance to return. Thank you for your hospitality, she said as they pulled up in front of the boarding house. Both you and your grandmother were very kind. Owen helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. You're welcome at the Broken Spur anytime, Miss Sullivan. He hesitated, then added, Grandmother would enjoy the company if you'd care to visit again. Nora smiled up at him. I'd like that. As she watched him drive away, Mrs. Peterson appeared at her side. Had to stay the night out there, did you? The creek was flooding, Nora explained. Mrs. Monroe insisted I stay. Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose. And how did you find young Mr. Monroe? Not much of a talker, that one. He was quite amiable, actually, Nora said, surprised to find herself defending him. He and his grandmother were very hospitable. Mrs. Peterson gave her a speculative look. Well, there's laundry waiting. Best get to it. The next few weeks passed quickly. Nora found herself looking forward to Saturdays, when Owen would come to town for supplies. He always stopped by the boarding house, ostensibly to deliver messages from his grandmother, but their conversations gradually lengthened, and sometimes he would invite her to walk with him as he completed his errands. During one such walk in early June, Owen mentioned that his grandmother was asking when Nora might visit again. She enjoys having another woman to talk to, he explained as they stood outside the general store. Gets tired of just my company, I expect. I'd love to visit, Nora said. But I'm not sure when I could get away. Mrs. Peterson keeps me quite busy. Owen shifted the package he was carrying. I could speak to her. See if she might spare you for a Sunday dinner. The idea of Owen asking for her company made Nora's heart beat a little faster. That would be nice. To her surprise, Mrs. Peterson readily agreed when Owen approached her. Sunday is my day off as well, she told Nora later. No reason you shouldn't have the same. That Monroe boy came by special to ask, did he? Nora felt her cheeks warm. He said his grandmother wanted company. His grandmother, is it? Mrs. Peterson's lips twitched. Well, you be sure to give old Mrs. Monroe my regards. That Sunday, Owen arrived promptly at 10 o'clock to collect Nora. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His usually unruly brown hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean shirt under his vest. You look nice, he said as she came down the boarding house steps in her best dress, a dark blue cotton that brought out the green in her eyes. Thank you. Nora accepted his hand into the wagon, noticing that he had cushioned the seat with a blanket for her comfort. The day was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, and the countryside in full summer bloom. As they drove, Owen pointed out landmarks and told her about the history of the area. Nora found herself captivated by his knowledge and the quiet pride he took in the land. Mrs. Monroe was waiting on the porch when they arrived, her face breaking into a wide smile at the sight of Nora. "There you are at last." "Owen's been watching the clock all morning." "Grandmother," Owen muttered, the tips of his ears reddening as he helped Nora down. "Well, you have," Mrs. Monroe said unrepentantly. "Now come inside, dear. I've been teaching Owen to make my special fried chicken, and you're to tell us if he's gotten it right." The meal was delicious, and the conversation flowed easily among the three of them. After they ate, Mrs. Monroe insisted that Owen show Nora around the ranch properly. "I've never seen much beyond the house," Nora admitted as they walked toward the barn. "Not much to see," Owen said modestly, "but it's home." The barn was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with stalls for at least a dozen horses. Owen introduced her to each one, his voice softening as he spoke of their individual traits and qualities. Nora was charmed by this side of him, the gentle way he handled the animals, the obvious affection in his touch. "This is Thunder," he said, stopping before a magnificent black stallion. "Best cutting horse I've ever owned." Nora reached out tentatively to stroke the horse's nose. "He's beautiful. Would you like to ride him?" Owen asked suddenly. Nora drew back in alarm. "Oh no, I couldn't. I've never been on a horse in my life." Owen's smile was reassuring. "You'd ride with me. Just around the corral, if you're willing to try." Something in his expression, a mixture of hope and understanding, made Nora nod despite her trepidation. "All right." Owen saddled Thunder with practiced ease, then helped Nora mount before swinging up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, his chest warm against her back. Nora's heart raced, and not just from the fear of being on such a large animal. "Ready?" Owen's voice was close to her ear. "I think so." He clicked his tongue, and Thunder began to move. Nora gasped and instinctively pressed back against Owen. His arm tightened reassuringly around her waist. "I've got you," he said. "Just relax and feel the rhythm." Gradually, Nora's fear eased as they circled the corral at a walk. The motion of the horse beneath her was strange, but not unpleasant, and the secure feeling of Owen's arms around her was distracting in an entirely different way. "What do you think?" Owen asked after a few minutes. "It's not as terrifying as I expected," Nora admitted. Owen laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest against her back. "High praise indeed. Shall we try a little faster?" Before Nora could object, Thunder had increased his pace to a gentle trot. She bounced uncomfortably for a few strides before Owen adjusted her position slightly. "Move with him, not against him," he instructed. Nora tried to follow his guidance, and to her surprise, found the faster gait becoming almost pleasant once she got the hang of it. They made several more circuits of the corral before Owen guided Thunder back to the gate. "You're a natural," he said as he helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Nora laughed breathlessly. "I doubt that very much, but thank you for the experience." They walked back to the house, where Mrs. Monroe was waiting with lemonade on the porch. She insisted Nora stay for supper as well, and somehow the day slipped away in pleasant conversation and quiet moments that felt increasingly meaningful. As Owen drove her back to town in the evening light, Nora found herself wishing the day didn't have to end. They were mostly silent on the journey, but it was a comfortable silence, broken occasionally by observations about the beauty of the sunset or the first evening stars appearing. When they reached the boarding house, Owen helped her down from the wagon, but didn't immediately release her hand. "Nora," he said, his voice low, "would you? That is, I was wondering if you might like to come to the 4th of July picnic with me next week? As my guest." Nora's heart leaped. "I would like that very much." The smile that spread across Owen's face was like the sun breaking through clouds.
"Good.
"That's good." He squeezed her hand once before letting it go. "I'll come by around noon." Nora floated up the boarding house steps, feeling lighter than she had in years. The day had been perfect, and now she had the picnic to look forward to. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, she felt like perhaps she had found where she belonged after all. The 4th of July dawned hot and clear. Nora had spent the previous evening washing and pressing her white summer dress with the blue ribbon trim, the nicest outfit she owned. As she pinned her hair up in a more elaborate style than usual, she couldn't help the nervous flutter in her stomach. Was this a proper courtship beginning? Or was she reading too much into Owen's invitation? Mrs. Peterson caught her checking her appearance one last time in the hall mirror. Don't you look nice?" she said with a knowing smile. "Someone special you're meeting at the picnic?" Nora blushed. "Owen Monroe invited me to accompany him." "Did he now?" Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly. About time that young man showed some interest in something besides that ranch of his. Owen arrived precisely at noon, looking handsome in a clean shirt and vest, his usually unruly hair tamed. He carried a large basket over one arm. "Grandmother sent enough food to feed half the county," he explained with a sheepish smile. "She was sorry not to come herself, but the heat aggravates her hip." They walked together to the town square, where it seemed all of Silver Creek had gathered. Bunting in red, white, and blue hung from every available surface, and a band played patriotic tunes on a makeshift platform. Children ran about with small flags, and the air was filled with the scent of barbecue and sweet treats. Owen found them a spot under a large cottonwood tree, spreading a blanket on the grass. As he unpacked the basket, fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, and an apple pie, Nora noticed several people watching them with curious expressions. "I think we're causing a stir," she murmured. Owen followed her gaze and grimaced slightly.
Small towns.
Everyone knows everyone's business. He hesitated. "Does it bother you, being seen with me?" "No, of course not," Nora assured him. "I just wasn't expecting quite so much attention." "It's not you they're staring at," Owen said. "It's me. I don't usually socialize much." Before Nora could respond, a shadow fell across their blanket. She looked up to see Mr. Bingham standing there, a younger woman on his arm. "Miss Sullivan," he said, his tone politely surprised. "I didn't realize you were still in town." Nora straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Bingham." "Yes, I found employment here." His gaze flicked to Owen, who had risen to his feet with a distinctly cool expression. "Monroe," he acknowledged with a nod. "Bingham," Owen returned flatly. An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only when the young woman with Bingham tugged at his arm. "Harold, you promised to get me some lemonade." "Of course, my dear." Bingham nodded stiffly to Nora and Owen. "Enjoy the festivities." As they walked away, Nora released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was awkward. Owen sat back down beside her, his expression thunderous. "That man." He shook his head. "I've never understood why the town thinks so highly of him." "He has money and connections," Nora said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Owen's gaze softened as he looked at her. "His loss is my gain, then." The simple statement sent warmth flooding through Nora. Before she could respond, the mayor called for everyone's attention, announcing the beginning of the official celebration with a reading of the Declaration of Independence. The rest of the afternoon passed in a pleasant blur. Owen introduced Nora to several of his neighbors, all of whom seemed surprised but pleased to see him at a social event. They watched the children's races and the men's shooting competition, which Owen declined to enter, despite several people insisting he was the best shot in the county. As the sun began to set, the band struck up again, this time playing waltzes and country dances. Couples began to move to a cleared area near the bandstand. "Would you like to dance?" Owen asked, offering his hand. Nora hesitated. "I'm not very practiced." "Neither am I," he admitted. but I think we could manage together. And somehow they did. Owen's hand was warm at her waist, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a tall man. Nora followed his lead, and if they occasionally missed a step, neither of them cared. She was acutely aware of the solid strength of him, the clean scent of soap and sun-warmed skin, the way his eyes never left her face. They danced until the stars came out and the first fireworks burst overhead in showers of red and gold. The crowd oohed and awed, but Nora found herself watching Owen's face, illuminated in the colorful light, more fascinating than the display above. As the evening wound down, Owen walked Nora back to the boarding house. They strolled slowly, neither seeming eager for the night to end. "I had a wonderful time," Nora said as they reached the steps. "So did I." Owen took her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. "Nora, I'd like to call on you properly, if you're agreeable." Nora's heart soared. "I'm very agreeable, Owen." He smiled, relief and happiness mingling in his expression. Then, with a gentleness that made her breath catch, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Nora Sullivan." "Good night, Owen Monroe." The next few weeks passed in a golden haze for Nora. Owen came to town twice a week to call on her, taking her for walks or simply sitting with her on the boarding house porch. On Sundays, he would bring her out to the ranch for dinner with Mrs. Monroe, who watched their growing attachment with obvious approval. One warm evening in late July, they sat together on the porch swing at the ranch, watching fireflies dance over the fields. Mrs. Monroe had retired early, leaving them alone with the night sounds and the gentle creaking of the swing. "I never thought I could be this happy," Nora said softly. "When I first came to Silver Creek and Mr. Bingham rejected me, I thought my life was over." Owen's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I thank God every day that he was fool enough to let you go." Nora turned to look at him, finding his face closer than she expected.
"Owen."
He hesitated only a moment before leaning in to press his lips gently against hers. The kiss was brief, but perfect, a promise of more to come. When he pulled back, Owen's expression was serious. "Nora, there's something I need to say." Her heart fluttered nervously. "Yes. I know we haven't known each other long, but He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling that first day when you showed up in the rain and talked to my grandmother like she was an old friend." Joy surged through Nora's chest. "I'm falling in love with you too, Owen." His smile was breathtaking. "Then would it be too soon to ask you to consider becoming my wife?" "Not right away, if you're not ready, but someday?" "It's not too soon," Nora whispered, reaching up to touch his face.
"And I don't need someday.
Whenever you want me to be your wife, I'm ready." Owen pulled her close, his kiss deeper this time, filled with promise and longing. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want to give you the family you never had, Nora," he said softly. "Me and grandmother for now, and maybe someday children of our own." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes. "I'd like that very much." They decided on a small wedding in September, when the worst of the summer heat would be past. Mrs. Monroe insisted on hosting it at the ranch, and threw herself into preparations with an energy that belied her age and infirmity. "Nothing makes that woman happier than having a project," Owen told Nora as they watched Mrs. Monroe directing the ranch hands in setting up tables in the yard. "I haven't seen her this lively in years." The day before the wedding, Nora was helping Mrs. Monroe arrange flowers when a wagon pulled up outside. To her surprise, Mrs. Peterson stepped down, followed by several of the young women from the boarding house. "Couldn't let one of my girls get married without a proper send-off," Mrs. Peterson declared, bustling into the house with her arms full of packages. "We've brought gifts and cake, and enough fussing to make any bride feel special." Nora was overwhelmed by the kindness. These women, who had been strangers just months ago, had become something like the family she'd never had. They spent the afternoon helping with final preparations, sharing advice and stories that made Nora blush and laugh by turns. As evening fell, Owen was banished to the bunkhouse with strict instructions not to see the bride until the ceremony. "Bad luck," Mrs. Monroe insisted, though her eyes twinkled with mischief. Nora slept little that night, too excited and nervous to rest. She rose with the dawn and stood by the window, watching the sun touch the hills with gold. Today she would become Owen's wife. The thought filled her with a joy so intense it was almost painful. Mrs. Monroe and Mrs. Peterson helped her dress in the new gown they had secretly made for her, cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. Her hair was arranged with fresh flowers, and Mrs. Monroe pressed a delicate cameo brooch into her hand. "This was my mother's and then my daughter-in-law's," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Now it's yours, my dear. Your family now." Family. The word resonated in Nora's heart as she made her way downstairs to where the minister waited in the flower-decked yard. The small gathering of neighbors and friends stood as she appeared, but Nora had eyes only for Owen. He waited for her beneath an arch of late summer roses, his expression a mixture of awe and adoration that took her breath away. As she walked toward him on Mrs. Peterson's arm, the older woman having insisted on giving her away, Nora felt as if her feet barely touched the ground. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When Owen slipped the simple gold band onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, Nora's eyes filled with happy tears. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Owen's kiss sealed their vows as the small crowd applauded. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food and dancing and more laughter than the old ranch house had heard in years. As twilight deepened, Owen led Nora away from the festivities toward a small cabin set back from the main house. "I built it for us," he explained, opening the door to reveal a cozy interior with new furniture and cheerful curtains at the windows. "Thought you might like a place of our own, even if it's just a stone's throw from grandmother." Nora stepped inside, touched beyond words by the care he had taken. "It's perfect, Owen." He closed the door behind them, suddenly looking uncertain. "I know it's small, but we can add on as needed. If we're blessed with children." Nora went to him, winding her arms around his neck. "It's more than I ever dreamed of having. A home, a husband." She kissed him softly. "A family." Owen's arms tightened around her. "My wild rose from the east," he murmured against her hair. "I'll spend my life making sure you never regret coming to Silver Creek." "I already don't," Nora assured him. "Everything that happened, even Mr. Bingham's rejection, led me to you. I wouldn't change a thing." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new home, Owen's heartbeat steady beneath her cheek, Nora reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her here. From an orphan child in Boston to a cherished wife in Wyoming territory, it was a journey she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, his voice drowsy. "That sometimes the things that seem like our greatest disappointments turn out to be blessings in disguise," Nora replied. "If Mr. Bingham had accepted me as his bride, I would never have found you." Owen's chuckle rumbled through his chest. "Remind me to thank him someday. Preferably when everyone in town can hear me do it." The first year of marriage brought changes both expected and surprising. Nora took to ranch life with an enthusiasm that delighted both Owen and his grandmother. She learned to ride properly, though never on Thunder, who remained exclusively Owen's mount, to cook over a wood stove without burning everything, and even to help with the calving in spring. Mrs. Monroe thrived with a young woman in the house, teaching Nora all the skills she had once passed on to her daughter-in-law. Together they made preserves and quilts, planned improvements to the house, and gossiped about the neighbors over endless cups of tea. Owen watched his wife and grandmother with quiet contentment, grateful beyond words for the way Nora had brought light and laughter back to the broken spur. The biggest surprise came in early spring, when a letter arrived from Denver. "It's from your sister," Nora told Owen as he came in from the barn. "She's coming for a visit. With her husband and children." Owen looked stunned. Sarah hasn't been back in 5 years. Not since she married James and moved away. "She says she wants to meet your new wife," Nora said, scanning the letter. "And to see her grandmother, of course." Mrs. Monroe was ecstatic at the news. "All my family under one roof again. Oh, what a blessing." The visit was chaotic and wonderful. Sarah, a pretty blonde woman with Owen's blue eyes, arrived with her husband and 3 small children who immediately took to their new Aunt Nora. The house rang with children's laughter and family stories, and Nora found herself embraced without reservation by this extended family she had suddenly acquired. On their last evening, as the children played under the watchful eyes of their father and grandmother, Sarah pulled Nora aside. "I need to thank you," she said, her expression serious. "For what?" Nora asked, puzzled. "For giving my brother back to me." Sarah glanced over to where Owen was showing his nephew how to whittle a stick. After Marie died, he shut himself away from everyone but grandmother. "When I married James and moved to Denver, I was heartbroken at how Owen seemed to just fade away. But you've brought him back. He smiles again. He laughs." Nora's throat tightened with emotion.
"He's done the same for me," she managed.
"I never had a family before Owen." Sarah hugged her impulsively. "Well, you certainly have one now, sister. A big, noisy one that loves you already." After the visitors departed, the house seemed oddly quiet despite Mrs. Monroe's constant chatter about her great-grandchildren. Nora found herself thinking about Sarah's words as she worked alongside Owen mending fences or tending the kitchen garden. A family of her own. It was still sometimes hard to believe. One morning in early summer, Nora woke feeling unusually tired and slightly nauseated. She brushed it off as perhaps something she'd eaten, but when the feeling persisted for several days, Mrs. Monroe gave her a knowing look. "When was your last monthly, child?" she asked bluntly. Nora blinked, suddenly realizing it had been some time. 6 weeks ago, at least." Mrs. Monroe nodded, satisfaction in her wrinkled face. "Just as I thought. You're carrying Owen's child." The world seemed to tilt around Nora. "A baby? Are you sure?" "I've been around long enough to know the signs," Mrs. Monroe said. "The tiredness, the sickness in the morning, the way you turned green when Owen brought in those freshly caught fish yesterday." She patted Nora's hand. "You'll be a wonderful mother." When Owen came in for dinner, Nora was still trying to process the news. She must have looked strange, for he immediately crossed to her side, concern in his eyes. "Are you unwell?" he asked, pressing a hand to her forehead. "No, Nora glanced at Mrs. Monroe, who nodded encouragingly. "Owen, I think. That is, your grandmother believes. We're going to have a baby." Owen froze, his hand still on her forehead. "A baby," he repeated, his voice faint. Nora's heart stuttered with sudden anxiety. "Are you? Is that all right?" A slow, brilliant smile spread across Owen's face. "All right? Nora, it's wonderful." He pulled her into a careful embrace, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "A baby," he said again, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." Mrs. Monroe sniffed loudly, wiping at her eyes. "Lord willing, I'll live to see my great-grandchild. James would be so proud, Owen." That night, as they lay in bed, Owen's hand rested protectively over Nora's still flat stomach. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted softly. "After Marie died, I didn't think I'd ever marry, let alone have children." Nora covered his hand with hers. "I know. I felt the same way. That I wasn't meant to have a family. And now look at us." Owen marveled. "A home, a marriage, a baby on the way." "A family," Nora whispered. The pregnancy was not easy. Nora suffered from terrible morning sickness that often lasted all day, and the summer heat left her constantly exhausted. Owen fussed over her endlessly, bringing her cool drinks and insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day. Mrs. Monroe was fond of advice and home remedies, some more effective than others. She also began knitting with renewed vigor, turning out tiny garments at an impressive rate. At this pace, the child will have enough clothes to last until adulthood, Owen teased her. Mrs. Monroe sniffed. Better too many than too few. Babies are messy business. As Nora's body changed, she found herself marveling at the miracle growing within her. This child would never know the loneliness she had experienced, never wonder where they belonged. They would be born into love, surrounded by family from their first breath. The baby arrived on a cold January night in 1877, after a long and difficult labor. Owen paced outside the bedroom door, driven nearly frantic by Nora's cries of pain. Mrs. Monroe and the midwife Mrs. Peterson had brought from town worked tirelessly, encouraging Nora through each contraction. Just before dawn, a lusty cry announced the arrival of James Owen Monroe, named for his grandfather and father. When Owen was finally allowed to enter the room, he found Nora pale but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "We have a son," she whispered as Owen knelt beside the bed, awe in his face as he gazed at the tiny, red-faced infant. "He's perfect," Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out tentatively to touch the baby's cheek. "Hello, James. I'm your pa." Mrs. Monroe stood in the doorway, tears streaming unashamedly down her wrinkled cheeks. "The circle completes," she said softly. "New life, new hope." The first months with baby James were a whirlwind of joy and exhaustion. Nora discovered that caring for an infant was harder than any work she had ever done, but also more rewarding. Owen proved to be a devoted father, willing to walk the floor with a colicky baby so Nora could rest, or to change diapers despite his initial clumsiness at the task. Mrs. Monroe delighted in her role as great-grandmother, often sitting for hours with the baby on her lap, singing old songs and telling stories he was far too young to understand. "He needs to know where he comes from," she explained when Owen teased her about it. "The stories of his people. It's important." As spring turned to summer, Nora found her strength returning. She began to take James outside for short walks, showing him the ranch animals and the wildflowers that dotted the hills. The baby grew rapidly, developing Owen's blue eyes and what promised to be Nora's auburn hair. "He's got your smile," Owen told her one evening as they watched James sleeping in his cradle. "And your determination. Did you see how he kept trying to roll over today until he managed it?" Nora leaned against her husband's solid warmth. "He's the best of both of us, I think." On James's first birthday, Sarah and her family traveled from Denver for a visit, bringing gifts and adding to the festive atmosphere. The house was full of laughter and children's voices, just as Mrs. Monroe had always wanted it to be. "Look at what you've created," Sarah said to Nora as they watched the cousins playing together on a quilt spread in the yard. "A real family." Nora smiled, watching Owen demonstrate to his nephews how to safely pet the gentlest of the ranch horses. "It's what I always wanted, even when I didn't dare to hope for it. And to think it all started because some fool in town rejected you for having no family," Sarah said with a shake of her head. "The best mistake of my life," Nora agreed. "Though I didn't think so at the time." That evening, after the birthday celebration was over and the visitors had retired to their rooms, Owen found Nora standing on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Happy?" he asked, slipping his arms around her from behind. "More than I ever imagined possible," Nora replied, leaning back against him. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? If Mr. Bingham had accepted me as his bride?" Owen's arms tightened around her. "I try not to. The thought of you with that pompous fool." He shook his head. "But then I wouldn't have James or you." And my life would be the poorer for it. I wouldn't trade this life for anything, Nora said softly. Not for all the fine houses or society connections in the world. Nor would I, Owen agreed. He turned her in his arms, his expression suddenly serious. Nora, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. What is it? I love you, he said simply. More today than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow. Nora's heart swelled with emotion. And I love you, Owen Monroe. You gave me the family I never had, and more happiness than I ever dreamed possible. As they stood together under the vast Wyoming sky, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a lonely orphan to a beloved wife and mother. It hadn't been the path she'd expected, but it had led her exactly where she was meant to be. 3 years later, the Broken Spur Ranch had prospered and grown. Owen had added 2 rooms to their cabin to accommodate their expanding family. James had been joined by a sister, Emma Rose, now 10 months old, and already showing signs of her father's stubborn nature. Mrs. Monroe, though increasingly frail, continued to be the heart of the household, delighting in her great-grandchildren and still offering sage advice whether asked for or not. On a warm summer evening, much like the one when Owen had first proposed, the family gathered on the porch after dinner. James, now an active 4-year-old, chased fireflies in the yard while Owen rocked Emma in his arms. Nora sat beside Mrs. Monroe, helping her with her knitting as her eyesight was failing. I was thinking, Owen said, his voice casual though Nora could detect an undercurrent of excitement, that we might take a trip to Boston next spring. Nora looked up in surprise. Boston? Why? I thought you might like to see it again. And to show the children where their mother came from. Mrs. Monroe nodded approvingly. Children should know their heritage. Both sides. But there's nothing for me in Boston, Nora protested. No family, no connections. Owen smiled at her, that same warm smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. That's not entirely true anymore. You have us. And we'd like to see where you grew up, even the orphanage. It's part of who you are, part of what made you the woman I love. Tears pricked at Nora's eyes. You would do that for me? We're your family, child, Mrs. Monroe said, reaching out to pat Nora's hand with gnarled fingers. Where you came from matters to us, because you matter to us. James came running up the porch steps, fireflies temporarily forgotten. What's Boston, Massachusetts? Nora pulled him onto her lap, his small body warm and solid against her. It's a city far away, where I lived before I came here. Can we go on the train? James asked, eyes wide with excitement. Owen laughed. Yes, son, we'll take the train. And maybe even a ship to see the ocean. As James peppered them with questions about trains and ships and cities, Nora caught Owen's eye over their son's head. The love she saw there still had the power to take her breath away. Later, when the children were asleep and Mrs. Monroe had retired for the night, Nora and Owen stood together at the fence, watching the moon rise over the hills. Thank you, Nora said softly. For what? For thinking of the trip to Boston. For wanting to know that part of me. Owen turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Nora Monroe, every part of you is precious to me. The orphaned girl from Boston, the rejected mail-order bride, the woman who stood before me in a cream-colored dress and promised to be my wife. The mother of my children. All of it. All of you. Nora rose on tiptoe to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they parted, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. When I came west, I was searching for a family, she said. I never imagined I would find one so perfect, or that I would be so completely happy. And to think, Owen murmured, his cheek against her hair. It all started because some fool in town couldn't see what was right in front of him. His loss, Nora said, echoing Owen's words from long ago. My gain, Owen finished, drawing her closer. the greatest gain of my life. As the moon climbed higher in the vast Wyoming sky, casting silver light over the land they both loved, Nora offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, for the man who had seen value in a woman with no family connections, for the children sleeping peacefully in the house behind them, and for the knowledge that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as disappointments, leading us exactly where we're meant to be.